My boots crunched on the gravel of my own driveway, and for a moment, I thought it was the sound of peace. 18 months in Afghanistan had made me crave the simplest things. The hum of a truck engine, the smell of soil after rain, the promise of home. But as I stood there, staring at the front porch light flickering like a dying heartbeat, something felt wrong. The air was too still. The curtains didn't move. Even the dog that usually barked at my footsteps was silent. I pushed open the door. The living room looked like a magazine cover. Perfect, polished fake. There was a scent in the air that didn't belong to me. Expensive, musky cologne, the kind a man wears when he wants to be noticed. I looked around. A pair of leather shoes sat neatly by the couch. I didn't own them. On the shelf, a new gaming console gleamed under the TV. Leo was too young for that, and Samantha had always said we couldn't afford one. My chest tightened, but training taught me to breathe. Assess. Observe. No noise from upstairs, no movement from the kitchen. I checked each room with the precision of a soldier clearing a house. Empty. Then I noticed the faint creak of a hinge somewhere outside, the barn. The smell of hay hit me as I opened the door, but there was another scent underneath. Something metallic, something human. My flashlight swept across tools, boxes, and then a small, trembling shadow. Leo! My voice cracked for the first time in years. He flinched before looking up, his face swollen and purple around one eye, lips split, tiny hands trembling around a worn blanket. I dropped to my knees, heart clawing at my ribs. What happened? Who did this? He looked at me, confusion and fear tangled in his eyes. Mommy and Shane hurt me, because I wouldn't call him Daddy. His voice was barely a whisper, thick with pain and betrayal that no child should ever know. The world stopped. Every sound faded, the wind, the creak of wood, even my own heartbeat. All that remained was a cold, calculated silence I hadn't felt since combat. The father in me broke apart, and the soldier stepped forward. I carried Leo inside, cleaned his face, and called the hospital. My hands were steady, my voice calm. When they took him to the ER, I stood in the hallway and made one phone call to a number I hadn't used in years. The package is compromised, I said quietly. The Viper is in the garden. Execute plan exile. Then I hung up. 3 hours later, Samantha got the call. Shane Maddox, her new lover, the man who hurt my son, was found dead in his apartment. A robbery gone wrong, they said. She screamed and sobbed into her hands. I just stood there, watching her, my heart numb. When she finally looked up at me, eyes red and wet, she didn't see a husband. She saw what I had become. A man who'd gone to war and brought it home. The hospital lights hit me like a flashbang, too bright, too sharp. I carried Leo through the sliding doors, feeling every ounce of his tiny, trembling body against my chest. The nurse at the counter froze when she saw him, then shouted for a doctor. Within seconds, a team surrounded us. They started firing questions, but I barely heard them. My voice came out steady, detached, like I was giving a field report. He fell, I said. Needs help now. They wheeled him down the hall, and he reached for me with one bruised hand. Daddy, don't go. I'm right here, buddy, I told him, keeping pace beside the gurney. You're safe now. I promise. Inside the exam room, I stood against the wall and watched the doctors work. They moved fast, cutting away his shirt, checking vitals, calling for imaging. I saw their faces shift, from concern to quiet anger, as they uncovered the truth written across his skin. Bruises along his ribs. A fracture in his arm. Older marks beginning to fade. I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. I just memorized every injury, every word they said, every timestamp on their forms. When they stepped out to order tests, I took out my phone and started taking pictures. Each flash burned the images into my mind. Leo's arm, the bruises shaped like fingerprints, the marks on his back. My hands didn't tremble. My breathing stayed even. This wasn't rage, it was focus. The same kind that kept me alive overseas. I knew what I was building, evidence. Proof. Justice would need it, no matter what kind it became. The doctor came back and handed me forms to sign. He mentioned notifying the police. I nodded, but I'd already made up my mind. I'd seen too many systems fail the innocent. I couldn't trust a process built on delay and paperwork. I needed something immediate. I turned toward the window, pulled out my phone again, and called a number I hadn't used in years. It rang once. Marcus, I said quietly. The package is compromised. The Viper is in the garden. Execute plan exile. Copy that, came the response, and then the line went dead. For a long moment, I just stood there, the phone still in my hand. The rage inside me had crystallized into something sharper, colder. It wasn't about revenge, it was about protection. I sat beside Leo's bed. His eyelids fluttered, heavy from the medication. I brushed a hand through his hair and whispered, "You did nothing wrong. You hear me?" "Nothing." He tried to smile. "Are you mad at Mommy?" I swallowed hard. "I'm just glad I found you." The machines beeped softly around us, the sterile smell of antiseptic thick in the air. I'd been trained to fight enemies in deserts and cities halfway across the world, but nothing prepared me for this kind of war. The one waged under fluorescent lights, with my son's tiny hand gripping mine. 3 hours after they admitted Leo, I sat in the hospital waiting area staring at the vending machine's dull reflection. The world outside those glass doors went on like nothing had changed. Inside, every breath felt heavy. I hadn't moved from the same chair since they took him in for x-rays. My phone sat face down on my knee, silent until a soft vibration broke through the hum of the hallway. I turned it over. A headline glowed across the screen. Local businessman found dead in uptown apartment, police suspect botched robbery. The name beneath it froze me for a second. Shane Maddox. The article was short, clinical. Forced entry. Blunt trauma. No witnesses. No suspects. Words like violent and efficient were scattered between quotes from neighbors who'd heard nothing. I scrolled once, twice, then stopped reading. Everything I needed to know was there. It was fast, clean, done. I stared at the screen for a long moment before pressing and holding my thumb over it until the notification disappeared. The phone went black again, the way it should have been all along. I slid it back into my pocket, leaned forward, and rested my elbows on my knees. My pulse didn't rise. My expression didn't change. There was nothing to say and no reason to say it. Across the waiting room, the doors opened. Samantha stepped in, her face pale, eyes wide. She was still dressed from earlier. Too much perfume, carefully applied makeup that couldn't hide the tremor in her hands. Her phone was pressed to her ear, a high, trembling voice leaking from the other end. "What? No, that can't be right, Shane." Her knees buckled, and she gripped the wall for balance. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering against the tile. The sound echoed across the quiet room. I didn't move to catch her. The nurse did, guiding her into a chair. She was sobbing now, her words breaking apart. "He's dead, they said he's dead." I looked at her for the first time. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, lips trembling, shoulders shaking. The sight should have hurt me, should have drawn pity or rage, but there was nothing left in me for either. I had already spent all of that in the barn, in the ER, in the call I'd made. This was just the result. She turned to me through the blur of her tears, searching for something, shock, grief, comfort, but my face gave her none of it. I kept my eyes steady, my voice quiet. "They'll want to question you. You should tell them everything you know." She covered her mouth, nodding weakly, unable to meet my gaze. I leaned back in the chair, eyes fixed on the floor, listening to her muffled sobs fade beneath the distant rhythm of hospital machines. Somewhere, justice had been delivered in silence. Here, in this waiting room, the only sound was a woman crying for a man who would never hurt my son again. The hallway outside Leo's room smelled of antiseptic and cold coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a sound that made silence feel louder. Samantha sat on the bench, still in the same clothes, her face streaked with tears that had already dried. I stood in front of her, holding the manila folder the doctor had given me. There was no anger left in my voice, just precision. "They finished the reports," I said flatly. "Do you want to see what your choices did?" She looked up, confused, eyes darting between me and the folder. "Cole, please." I didn't. I opened it and laid the papers across her lap. "These," I said, tapping each line, "are the x-rays. The fracture. The bruising patterns. The doctors estimate at least 3 separate incidents." My tone was measured, clinical, the way I debriefed men after a mission. "This one was from a week ago. This probably longer. And this?" I turned the page, revealing the photo I'd printed from my phone, Leo's face battered and swollen. "This is what you protected." Her breath hitched. "I didn't know it was that bad," he said. I cut her off. "He said a lot of things, didn't he? About what you deserved. About what money could fix." I pulled another folder from my jacket, thinner, older. "You think I didn't notice the new BMW? The one you said your cousin helped you lease? Or the trips? California, Chicago, 2 weeks before I came home. And the jewelry, Sam. You told me it was from your mother. She's been dead for 5 years." She tried to speak, but I didn't let her. I crouched slightly, so we were eye level, my voice dropping until only she could hear. You let that man into our house. You gave him my son's trust. And when he hurt him, you looked the other way because you liked the gifts. Tears slid down her cheeks, and she shook her head. I didn't mean for any of this. Intent doesn't matter, I said quietly. Actions do. Consequences do. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the printed photograph again, holding it inches from her face. What was the price for this, Sam? Which piece of jewelry was worth our son's safety? Her hands trembled as she covered her mouth. The hallway was empty except for us, but it felt like the walls themselves were listening. She couldn't even look at the photo. I let the silence stretch until it broke her. Then I took the papers back, slid them neatly into the folder, and stood. You're going to tell the truth, I said. To me, to the doctors, to whoever asks. No more stories. No more pretending. She nodded weakly, whispering something I couldn't make out. I didn't ask her to repeat it. I turned toward Leo's door, the sound of her quiet sobs following me down the hall, fading beneath the steady hum of the hospital lights. The house was silent when we got back. Leo was asleep in his room, a faint hum from the baby monitor, the only sound in the air. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee that had already gone cold. Samantha stood across from me, pale and shaking, her hands gripping the back of a chair. The hospital's fluorescent light had been replaced by the softer, golden glow of our kitchen lamp. But it didn't make the moment feel any warmer. Start from the beginning, I said. Everything. No lies. She hesitated, staring down at the floor. It wasn't supposed to be anything, she whispered. He just noticed me. Who? I asked, though I already knew. Shane. His name came out like a confession. He came into the diner one day, started talking to me. Said I looked tired, said I deserved better. He kept showing up. I told him I was married, but he didn't stop. I didn't interrupt. I just listened, my hands folded on the table. She went on, her words spilling faster, trembling. He bought me coffee, little things at first. Said I reminded him of someone he used to love. I thought it was harmless, just talk. Then he started showing up with gifts, jewelry, purses, a watch. When I said no, he left them in the car. I was stupid, Cole. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I leaned back, expression unreadable. But it did. She nodded, tears forming again. I felt trapped. He made me feel seen, and then he didn't let go. He started saying things about you being gone all the time, about Leo needing a man around. I swear, I didn't know how to stop it. Every time I tried, he'd remind me of everything he'd bought, all the money he'd spent. He said I owed him. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. Her voice broke. When you got deployed again, he moved closer. Said he'd help with the house, fix things. He started staying over more. Leo didn't like him. He said Shane yelled when I wasn't around, made him call him Dad. I told him to stop, but Shane said he was just being firm, teaching him discipline. She stopped, covering her face with her hands. Discipline, I repeated quietly. That's what you called it. I didn't know how bad it was, she cried. I told myself it was just tough love. Then I saw a bruise one day and he told me Leo fell. I wanted to believe him. I was scared. By then, I didn't know how to get away. I couldn't undo what I'd done. I thought if I ignored it, it would stop. The clock ticked between us, slow and unforgiving. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark fields stretching beyond the porch. Her story filled every space between us with a kind of quiet poison. You let a man like that near our son, I said finally, my tone even. You let him in because it was easier than facing yourself. Samantha didn't answer. She just cried softly, the sound small and hollow. The truth was out now, ugly, full, complete. And no part of it could ever be taken back. The rain beat softly against the windows as I sat at the table, papers spread in perfect order, photos, records, proof. Samantha stood in the doorway, shaking, her breath shallow. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was already loud enough. I told her I knew everything. She tried to speak, tried to say she hadn't known who he really was, but her words trembled and fell apart halfway through. I slid the first photo toward her, Shane's face, captured in a mugshot, lifeless eyes staring back. Then came the restraining orders, financial documents, and police reports. Each sheet was a nail in the coffin of her denial. He wasn't a man who loved her. He was a predator who had played the same game in every town, with every woman, until the pattern became his signature. Her tears came fast, almost too late. She whispered that Shane said he loved her, that he promised she wasn't alone. I told her that was exactly how he operated, finding loneliness, feeding it, twisting it into dependence. When she tried to say she didn't know how deep it went, I pushed another file forward. Names of women before her, each one with the same story, the same bruises hidden behind expensive jewelry. I told her I started digging the moment I came home, that before I even confronted her, before I made a single call, I'd already seen the pattern. My voice stayed calm because it wasn't rage driving me anymore. It was clarity. I told her men like Shane leave trails, they always do, and that I'd spent my career learning how to follow them, how to stop them before they destroy anything else. She finally looked up, her face pale, realization dawning like a shadow. She said I planned it. I told her no, I prepared. There's a difference between revenge and justice, I said. I didn't plan for Shane to die, but I made sure he'd never touch my son again. I leaned forward and looked her straight in the eyes. You brought a wolf into our son's life, I told her quietly. And you forgot what his father was trained to hunt. The words hung in the air between us, steady as the rain outside. She turned away, tears spilling, but I stayed seated, calm, unmoved. There was nothing left to say. The truth had done what I needed it to, cut through every lie and leave only silence. I stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass like thin veins of silver. Samantha sat on the couch, her face pale and hollow, clutching a tissue that had already fallen apart in her hands. I spoke quietly, every word deliberate, leaving no room for misinterpretation. I told her this wasn't a discussion or a plea. It was a choice. She would end everything that tied her to him. Every car, every diamond, every piece of luxury that came from that man's money. She would sell them, return them, or burn them if she had to, but they would not stain our home any longer. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to beg, but I cut her off before she could breathe a word. I told her she would also leave those people behind. The ones who smiled with Shane at dinners, who laughed when he bragged about business deals, who looked away from bruises. She would quit her social circles, walk away from the whispers and pretenses, and start over from nothing if she wanted a place in Leo's life again. Her hands shook, her voice barely audible when she asked, "And if I can't?" I didn't blink. I told her then that she didn't have to. No one was forcing her. But if she couldn't, she would pack her things and go. She wouldn't see Leo again. She wouldn't know where we were going or how to reach us. The decision was hers, but the consequences were mine to enforce. I handed her the number of a therapist, a woman who specialized in trauma and recovery. I told her she'd start there tomorrow morning, no excuses, no delays. Every session would be logged, every step documented. She would focus entirely on Leo's healing, his safety, his trust, his future. Nothing else mattered. Not her image, not her guilt, not her comfort. She started to cry, covering her face, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. That part of us was gone. I told her the only thing that still connected us was Leo, and even that was hanging by a thread she'd already frayed. You will become the mother he deserves, I said evenly, or you will walk away forever. My voice didn't rise, didn't crack. It was steady, absolute. The rain outside deepened, tapping against the glass like a clock counting down. She sat there for a long time, silent, broken, understanding at last that there was no room left for apology. I watched her carefully, not out of cruelty, but out of finality. She needed to know this was the end of the road. I gave her two choices, redemption or disappearance. And I meant every word. The weeks that followed were stripped of glamour and comfort. Samantha moved through them like a shadow, learning to breathe again. The BMW was the first to go. I watched from the porch as she handed the keys to a buyer, her hand trembling but firm. The jewelry followed, each piece boxed, appraised, sold. What had once sparkled on her wrists and throat was now reduced to slips of paper and silence. I didn't speak. She didn't ask for forgiveness. This wasn't about words. It was about weight being lifted one possession at a time. The house felt bare without the shine of her old life, but it also felt cleaner, less haunted. She avoided mirrors, stopped wearing perfume, stopped pretending. Each morning, she drove herself to therapy. She came home quiet, worn out but steadier. Leo was slow to respond to her presence. He'd flinch when she entered the room, look to me first for reassurance. She never forced herself on him. She'd simply stay nearby, waiting, letting the silence fill with patience instead of excuses. The moment that changed something between them happened late one night. Leo had been asleep when a nightmare took hold of him, his small body twisting, fists clenched, a cry caught in his throat. I stood at his door but didn't move right away. I wanted to see what she would do. She rushed in barefoot, dropped to her knees beside the bed, and gathered him into her arms before he could wake fully. He resisted at first, pushing weakly, murmuring for me. She held him tighter, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Mommy's here. Mommy's so sorry." Her tears fell onto his pillow. She didn't try to justify anything, didn't look around for help. She just stayed there, crying softly until his breathing evened out again. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by his bed, head bowed, every so often brushing his hair from his forehead like she was trying to memorize the feel of him. The next morning, she looked older, but lighter somehow, like she'd faced something she'd been running from. I didn't praise her. She didn't need it. Redemption doesn't come from acknowledgement. It comes from the quiet consistency of doing what's right after every wrong has been revealed. Over time, she began to rebuild small bridges, helping Leo with his drawings, sitting with him during therapy sessions, showing up without the armor of gifts or promises. Each act was clumsy but sincere. She didn't talk about Shane, didn't defend herself anymore. She just showed up, every single day, carrying the quiet kind of remorse that doesn't need an audience. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't absolution. But for the first time since I'd come home, it was a start. Months passed before life began to resemble something steady again. We sold the old house, the one that held too many ghosts, and moved to a small place on the edge of town. No polished floors, no luxury, no echoes of betrayal. Just walls that didn't whisper, a yard where Leo could play without flinching. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and for the first time, that felt like enough. I found work at a local construction firm, nothing glamorous, just honest labor. It kept my hands busy and my mind from drifting too far into places I couldn't afford to revisit. The uniform was gone, but the discipline remained. Every morning I'd wake early, make breakfast, and drive Leo to therapy before heading to work. Routine was my new battlefield, and stability was the victory I chased. Leo changed slowly, like spring thawing after a long winter. At first, his laughter came out uncertain, cautious, like he was waiting for permission to be happy. But over time, it grew stronger. He began drawing again, bright colors, simple shapes. The nightmares didn't vanish, but they came less often. Some nights, I'd hear him giggle in his sleep, and that sound alone made every burden feel bearable. His therapist said progress was steady, and I believed her. I could see it in his eyes, the fear was fading. Samantha carried her guilt quietly, the way one carries a permanent scar. She kept herself occupied with Leo's therapy sessions, community volunteering, and rebuilding the trust she'd shattered. We didn't talk about Shane anymore. His name had no place in the new world we were building. But his shadow lingered, not as a person, but as a reminder of how fragile peace could be. There were nights when I'd wake and find her sitting in the living room, staring out the window, lost in thought. I never asked what she was thinking. I already knew. Some ghosts don't speak. They just sit beside you, reminding you of the line you crossed to protect what mattered. Our marriage wasn't what it used to be, but it wasn't broken either. It existed in a fragile space between survival and connection. There were days when we worked together like a team, and others when silence stretched like a wall between us. Still, we stayed. Not out of habit, but out of choice. Maybe that's what love becomes after it's been through fire. Not a feeling, but an endurance. Sometimes, when I tucked Leo into bed, I'd catch Samantha watching us from the hallway, her eyes soft but heavy. We didn't speak of forgiveness. It wasn't something I could offer yet. What we had instead was an understanding, silent but real. We'd both done things we couldn't undo. But for Leo's sake, we would keep going. The past had burned us clean, and from the ashes, we were building something simpler, quieter, and painfully honest. A new foundation made not of love's promises, but of its survival. The house is quiet now, the kind of silence that doesn't hurt anymore. Leo sleeps soundly in the next room, his small breath steady, the bruises that once marked him now long gone. The moonlight spills through the window, soft against his face, and for a moment, it's hard to believe how close I came to losing him, to losing everything. I sit by his bedside, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing, and I realize this is the sound I fought for. Not medals, not glory, not absolution, just this. Peace. Fragile, imperfect, but real. Sometimes, I catch myself tracing the invisible scars on my own soul, wondering when exactly the soldier died. Maybe it was the moment I made that call, or maybe it was long before that, somewhere in the desert when I stopped believing I'd ever come home the same. What came back wasn't a soldier, not really. It was something else. Something colder, quieter, but sharper. a guardian forged in places where morality bends under the weight of necessity. I used to think war made me dangerous. Now I know it only trained me for what was waiting here. I glance toward the hallway where Samantha stands, half in shadow, watching me. She doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. The air between us carries a truth words can't hold. What we share now isn't love in the way it once was. It's heavier, more solemn. She looks at me with eyes that understand what I've done, eyes that will never see me the same again. There's fear in them, but there's something else too, respect. The kind that's born from knowing someone who has walked through hell and chosen to come back only for the sake of one thing: our son. I rise quietly, adjusting Leo's blanket, making sure no part of him feels the cold. He shifts, murmurs something incoherent, then settles again. I place a hand on his chest, feeling the steady pulse beneath my palm. That heartbeat is my redemption, the proof that what I did, however dark, however unforgivable, was not in vain. I'll carry the weight of my choices, so he'll never have to. The burden is mine alone. Outside, the wind stirs the trees, and the world feels distant, hushed. I stand in the doorway for a long time, watching him sleep, until my gaze drifts back to Samantha. She turns away first, heading down the hall. I follow her with my eyes, but say nothing. Words aren't enough to bridge what blood built between us. The family is whole again, but it stands on a foundation carved out of pain and brutal love. And yet, as I step back into the quiet, I understand something final. Maybe this is what it means to protect. To guard the light, no matter how dark you have to become to do it. Do you think I made the right choice by taking justice into my own hands, or should I have let fate decide? Tell me what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like mine.